Really excited about the session today, where we have St. Mary's College of California, students from the MFA program there, and the professor, who I'll introduce in a minute, who are editing a book, an upcoming anthology on processing crisis by Risk Press. And they're going to be sharing, reading their work, discussing the process around publishing, submission, and editing for the book, and talking about how literature can help us survive and thrive in these difficult times. So really excited about that session and the community. For those that are participating live, we thank you. There'll be chance for question and answer, for engagement, and a reminder to everybody that these will then live on in a replays in archive fashion, accessible to those that want to learn more about the program, the poets, or the book. So that's all available. I want to mention that somebody here will win a prize each session throughout the whole summit. Throughout our 22 sessions, we'll be giving away a Poet Scores Poetry gift bag. And the gift bag will include some cool Scores swag, and also 2 tickets to our Rising Voices event, where we share some of the voices of our young student poet athletes. So that's coming up in April. So Matthew, before I turn it over to you, we're going to take a poetic moment, and I'm going to share a very short poem from one of our Scores students. And this is called Happiness. And maybe it's not exactly the topic here that we're talking about, but who couldn't use more happiness here on any day and days like today. So this is by Emma from Moscone Elementary School, 5th grader in San Francisco, and it's called Happiness. Happiness is the color pink. It smells like chocolate cake. It feels like winning a ribbon. It tastes like ice cream. Happiness sounds like the song of waterfalls. Give a little clap to Emma and her her happiness poem. So that's kind of some of the fun stuff that we're working on over here. So without further ado, Matthew, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce yourself, the program, the poets that you and the students that you have gathered here today. You yourself are an accomplished poet and professor, and we're eager, again, excited and eager to hear some of the great work that you're doing at St. Mary's these days.
Thanks so much, Colin, and thanks to you all for organizing this really cool summit. And we're happy and honored to be here. Yeah, like you said, my name is Matthew Zapruder, and I'm a professor in the MFA program in creative writing at St. Mary's College. We have a great graduate program in creative writing. We bring in top students from all over the country and world, actually, to study creative writing with us in 3 different genres: poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. And let's see, the panel, I've asked a few students to join us, to my talented writers, and they're helping to edit an anthology that will be published next year, called Processing Crisis, and I'll ask them to talk more about it. But it's basically, the idea is to collect work by different writers about how they're dealing with this very difficult time and resisting and processing this, this moment that we're in, and the ongoing American moment of, which systemic repression and all sorts of other incredibly hard things, and how people are using literature and writing to push back in all sorts of different ways. And last semester, part of the idea of this, I think, I'd like to ask them, is that came out of a class that I taught last semester, where we examined writing of poetry of resistance and poetry that was written in crisis. And we talked about all the different ways we can understand how literature pushes back, resists, creates a different space, and imagines a different way of being. And it was really nice to hear that poem that you read, Colin, by the kid in the elementary school, Emma, because I think that is actually very much in line with our topic right now, because to even imagine being happy during this time is a form of resistance, and a form of processing the difficulties. And that is one of the things that I think sometimes we lose as we get older, that childlike ability to be resilient, and to just imagine freely and, imagine across difficulties or across differences, and imagine being together. So yeah, just some of the writers. I thought I would just mention quickly some of the writers who we read in the course. Just if people are interested, we talked about a variety of contemporary writers and writers from the past. Some are one of the people we talked about was Tongo Eisen-Martin, who's actually the current San Francisco Poet Laureate, I believe, and his books are published by City Lights. Victoria Chang, who wrote a wonderful book called Obit. And her crisis was more of a family crisis, her parents being ill and passing away. So that was a different way of thinking about crisis, less, overtly political, although there were some elements of that. And Terence Hayes. We talked about Brenda Hillman's work. Brenda, whom I teach with at St. Mary's, who writes a lot of what's known as eco poetry. That's poetry written about the ecological crisis that we're in. Mahmoud Darwish, Palestinian poet who writes poems of resistance to the occupation of Palestine and the exile of the Palestinian people from their lands. C.A. Conrad, who writes poems about eco-poetic poems, but also poems about queerness and about identity and about pushing back against the forms of oppression of that. And we read Claudia Rankine, who writes a lot about whiteness and racism and systemic racism. So those were the sort of writers who we were talking about. And then now this anthology is, like I said, is collecting work by contemporary writers, and hopefully I will hear from the editors about what they're thinking about and what they're doing. But I thought it'd be cool to turn it over to each of them to hear a little bit about what they're thinking, and also about a little of their own work, and maybe an example of other work that they think does, engages with this topic. So our three participants are Hannah Woolenberg, Layla Zareh, and Julia Gardner. And so I guess I'll just ask Hannah, each of you to go in turn, and maybe you can just say just a bit about yourself before you read. And then after the three of you have read, maybe we can just talk a bit and then see if anybody else has any comments or questions. So Hannah, would you mind getting us started?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. I am a first-year creative nonfiction student, and I'm one of the senior editors of the anthology. And I work with two other nonfiction editors to edit the nonfiction pieces that will go into the anthology. So I'll be reading from a nonfiction piece that I wrote that talks about the fires that we had last summer and fall, and how they have kind of affected my own life, because I had a house fire when I was in first grade. So yeah, I'll just read a little bit from that. I was not old enough at the time to retain every detail of the disaster, nor the endless complications of insurance, finances, or building a house from rubble. I'm not sure I would understand now either. I often tell people that I'm like a sponge that soaks up the emotions of those around me. That feels as true then as it does now. It's not so much that I remember the gritty details. There are not many concrete images in my head of that day or the weeks after. It's that I remember feeling the anger of my grandfather, who, as the sun set on the day our house was destroyed, leaving it to sit alone in the dark, yelled at every single person who passed our street not to get near it. There was nothing left to take but waterlogged furniture, the metal foundation of my red-colored bunk bed, a wedding dress, all waiting patiently, unprotected, to be taken down in inventory by the insurance company. It was all we had left. Please don't take it. I felt the immediate grief of my grandmother, who threw up in our front yard near the garden box of baby's breath when she saw what was left of our house. She had been alive in German bunkers when towns were bombed and burned to the ground during the air raids of World War II, but never had her own home touched until now. I felt my parents' stress over money. It's not an argument that I remember, nor words told to me. They tried to keep these matters away from the young ears of my brother and me. But I must have sensed it because my mother tells a story of me handing her an envelope that is filled with $3 that I assuredly got from her, and the note that says in wobbly handwriting, "This is for the windows." She keeps the envelope filled with its original contents in a jewelry box. I drive home the following week. It's a relatively short drive, Moraga to Sacramento. I make an excuse that I need to bring back the coffee grinder, which I do, but really I just want to go home for a night. In the middle of a chaotic week before a slow Labor Day weekend spent inside. The air in Moraga has been relatively nice enough to run in, to keep the windows open all night. Driving along 680, you would never guess this. I cross over the toll bridge in Benicia and suddenly I am in a hell zone. The sky is orange, the air is dusty, and the trees are exhausted from wind. It demands 2 hands on the wheel as I drive. I turn down my music. I press the button on the car dashboard that makes sure the air conditioning takes in filtered air, as to not bring in the smell of smoke. I brace myself for what I will see off of I-80 in Vacaville. There are no flames, just scorched earth. The burns come all the way up to the lip of the highway pavement. I imagine the flames jumping off ramps and drawing circles around street signs, dancing down hillsides and teasing apartment buildings. I think about the families that have lost their home this year, last year, the year before, who is still evacuated, who is currently rebuilding, who will never build again. A concept that I think about every fire season, and what now, as a season of its own, grows longer on both ends of summer and fall, is the idea of being warned that your house may catch on fire. A few precious days or hours to collect your things and brace yourself for something you really cannot prepare for. I sit with the thought of evacuation and I torture myself in wonderment of which is worse, waiting to hear the bad news or not knowing until the flames have had their way. We were not warned when our house burned down. We didn't have time to grab the things we loved most in the world, the things saved by firefighters, the frames off the wall, the random clothing on hangers, were now our most cherished items in the world. And of course, we had each other, healthy and alive. That day in May of 2005, I was taught that things are just things. But now I wonder if given the choice, what would my family choose to save and what would burn? Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't. That was really moving, Hannah. Thank you. Yeah, that time has been so hard, and I feel like a lot of us have needed writing to process what we've been going through, and doesn't make it go away, but it definitely at least allows us to kind of start to be or continue to be a thinking being in the middle of it, and it's to connect it to your past was a really beautiful and moving thing. So thank you for that, Hannah. That was a beautiful piece. Yeah, so Layla, I was wondering if maybe you would go next.
Yeah, sure. So hi, my name is Layla. I am also a first-year student in the MFA program at St. Mary's. I am doing the poetry route, so I am in different genre than Hannah, but we do work together on the anthology. I am one of the editors. For my piece, I wanted to do a poem from basically an observation that I made about my family. Whenever the men in my family mourn, they do not ever use their own words. They always rely on lyrics of other artists, specifically a really popular Afghan artist named Ahmad Zoya, who was like martyred during the 70s. And the women in my family always mourn in silence. So I kind of wrote a poem based on that observation. My uncle interrupts the majlis to put on Ahmad Zoya. And for the first time that night, my cousins are rendered speechless. Both generations sit in their grief and let a man 6 feet under sing life into their anguish. Imshab az bada kharabam kano bigzar bimira. Tonight, serve me enough wine to destroy me and let me die. The comfort is an alcohol stain on the shoulders. When tragedy does not reach your tongue, your existence will find a way to voice its regret at the expense of the body. The manifestation is less caustic when a melody is playing. The men in my family mourn using another man's voice. The women suffer in silence. I have learned to translate memories without experiencing them, a gift that comes with living in diaspora, to have pieces of you buried under soil and soot. I catch my mother's gaze, forlorn and fraying. Is evocation a liberty I have inherited from my oppressor, to be exiled by one's consciousness? An enigma for a father and a shell for a mother. I don't know how to say these words in Farsi. If I learn, will my father's tear ducts recognize me? Maybe the beauty in hearing the dead sing is knowing that language comes back.
Wow. That was really amazing. No, again, like see another piece of writing and a poem. It's like trying to be in the middle of a lot of difficult feelings and create a space to think about things and really feel them. I don't know. I feel like sometimes a poem can like slow us down, and give us a chance painfully to feel things and understand things. And I also really appreciate that window, or a little bit of window into your family's culture, your larger culture. That's a thing that we wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise, or I know I wouldn't. And so I just really appreciate that and value that. So that's, I think, also a meaningful, really important thing that poetry can do, is that to assert that experience and put it there for all of us. So thank you for that, Layla. And also just really a beautiful poem, or probably most importantly, was a beautiful poem. Maybe that in that way it's a form of resistance.
No, thanks for creating the space for it. Yeah.
Well, you created the space for it, but yeah, thank you for making that. So we'll circle back and talk more, but I'd love to hear from Julia as well.
Yeah, I'm Julia. I'm a second year MFA poetry candidate, and I treasure Hannah and Layla and all the work they're doing on this anthology, and it's very humbling following them. I appreciate being here with all of you. This is a poem called My Past Self is Speaking to a Crowd of Those in Mourning. I'd rather just read it than give context. I think you'll get the context. She is almost 9, with all of them whispering as if death were a secret. The room inhales and exhales with businessmen and aunts. Some of them are wearing skirts the length of sadness. The church rug is patterned like eyes pressed closed by fingers. Loss gathers the living and turns them fragile. She is almost 9, and she wants his wake to be joyful. He was joyful, her father. How he'd reach to squeeze her foot at stoplights. How he'd wake her with sunlight falling in ribbons around him, whiskers to her cheek. Spin her in circles like a human carousel designed to love and love her. He'd ask her to read him stories. Once she woke to the teenage musk of her older brother holding her so tight, her mother in the doorway, and she knew. They would put her in a room with pizza and soda and other sad children. Adults would make her watch videos of puppets who had lost a loved one. The sad children would find wheelchairs in a closet and race down the halls. And against the distortions of their knowing, they would laugh. She is almost 29 and she remembers. At the wake, she welcomed the lost adults from a podium. She thanked them for loving her dad, but she is sure that she loved him the most.
I know that poem, having read it several times, but hearing it read out loud is such a powerful experience. You know, one thing occurred to me, it's such a great poem. And I think, you know, all what occurred to me is in all three of your readings, I mean, I think they were brave. You know, they encounter difficult things. And I think they're also, they're genuine in that they admit the difficulty of the feelings, each of the feelings, but there's also moments there, each of the three readings is also so full of life too, which I think is what makes them feel so painful in a lot of ways. And yeah, just the ability to like pull back from these really difficult experiences and see them a bit and see them clearly while still being inside them is really impressive. That's really great readings. All three of you is really amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I guess maybe I just wanted to ask each of you first, you know, how you all feel writing helps you in these moments or other moments in your life. How does it help you? So I guess I should say that the book again is you know, has this general theme of processing crisis, but you know, I'm wondering how you're each thinking about that for yourselves as writers, and then how you think of it, you know, in terms of what you read, like what helps you as a writer and what helps you as a reader. And you know, maybe we can just go in the same order that we went in to read. Hannah, yeah, what helps you you as a writer, and what helps you as a reader in terms of crisis and resistance?
I think I've always processed things through writing. I've always kept a journal since I was little. It's just been my form of processing emotions and pretty much, you know, just the experience of living. And I think I've come to learn that like how powerful words and stories and narratives can be in resistance. And I think I learned that through reading others' work. And especially now being in community with such wonderful writers in the MFA program, and reading their work and the ways that they're using their words to resist, has been really inspiring. So yeah, I think I'm still learning how powerful words can be, and I think that's a really beautiful thing, especially right now in this moment.
Yeah, I think we're all still learning. I mean, every writer's always learning, and words are such a weapon that's being used against us in so many ways that makes it the most powerful way to fight back too. The kind of clarity that you all displayed in your own work and is itself a sort of kind of weapon to push back and fight back. Yeah. Hannah, I don't know if there's I mean, maybe I always hate this question because I immediately forget everything, but is there any writer that you've been reading recently or from the past that particularly has been helpful in thinking about this for you? Like I said, anytime anybody asks me this question, it's like I never read a book in my entire life. But and so it's okay to say you can't think of anything right now, but I don't know if anybody jumps to mind in particular. Nope, just muted. Okay, well, if you think of as the conversation goes on, you can feel free to jump back in. That is always the hardest question, I would say. But Layla, how about you? What's helpful to you as a writer, or how do you think about it as a writer and also as a reader? What helps you?
So I think for me, writing and reading have always gone hand in hand together. I only write, like, I guess, most accurately or communicate most effectively through my writing when I'm reading. And it also helps because it feels less lonely. I get to like participate in a larger conversation. I feel like being a writer, people always assume like, you know, you're curled up somewhere scribbling in your notebook. And yeah, you know, that's some of it. But for the most part, for me, I think the thing that makes it so great is being in a program like this where I get to like talk to other writers who understand the feeling of like finishing a piece or reading a really good poem. Like, you know, like I can go into like a Zoom space and just be like, guys, I read like this really amazing poem, and everyone's gonna look at me and be like, well, what are you waiting for? Do you want to share it? And that level of excitement, like whether through some, you know, virtual space or like a physical space, is always just really rewarding. So I've always liked that about the reading aspect and the writing aspect and how it's intertwined.
That's really beautiful, Layla. And I like, you know, one of the things, you know, I was a lonely kid. I think like a lot of writers, I was sort of a lonely kid or like a sort of introverted kind of kid. And there's something like writing is nice because it gives you an excuse to be alone, but you're also in a way, you're always reaching out when you're writing, even if it's just imaginary. And also when you're reading too, these are like your friends, your books or the people are your friends. And it's okay if they're dead or if they're alive, they're still your friends. And so you have this chorus of voices around you. So you're both kind of like being authentic to your introverted, lonely self, but also not just sitting there staring out into space or feeling like horribly miserably by yourself, because you're linked through your writing and through your imagining to an entire tradition of stuff. I was wondering maybe if I don't want to put you on the spot, Layla, but it's something I know you know a lot about because you studied his work, but we did talk about Darwish in our class. And I don't, you know, just if you have any thoughts about him, I mean, I found him to be, you know, he's just one of the greats. And I don't know if he's been helpful to you at all in thinking about writing his resistance.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the way Darwish like writes about exile and loneliness makes the feeling feel as if you're not the only person in the world to ever have experienced it. And I think that's one of the nice and beautiful things about writing is that when you write something, you know, like it often feels very isolating. And then to be in conversation with another poet that you often admire and hear and read their works and understand that, you know, they've gone through their own personal version of whatever you're trying to communicate to the world is almost comforting, because it's like, here's a mentor who, whether they're aware of it or not, in their lifetime or not, has sparked you in a conversation, you know, that you're all having, whether it's, you know, through your writing or through their reading. And in a way, I feel like that's affected me very much. Reading his work has like forced me to ask questions I never thought I'd be able to ask, and just other writers as well, but mostly him.
Well, that's great. Yeah, he's one of the Eternals for sure. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Layla. I appreciate that. Julia, how about you? How are you helped by your writing, your own writing, and also your reading?
How am I helped by other writers?
And your own writing. I mean, either one. You know, your own work in terms of, you know, pushing back and processing crisis and resisting, but also if they're, you know, you're reading, it's to, you know, whatever you want to say about it.
Yeah, I'd have like a couple different thoughts. I think the interesting thing about crisis when you're a writer is so often pain can be paint, you know? I think that that's what happens when you're an artist. That's not saying that if you have trauma that you should write about it. I think that exploiting your trauma for art is not the answer, but if it's something that can be healing for you, if it's something that can give you a sense of clarity or also finding beauty in that pain, then I think that there are a few things that are more powerful than that, which is part of why this community is so special, because we all kind of share that impulse to kind of go there and make something from it. One thing that I've been kind of fixing on recently is how like aging of women aging isn't portrayed kindly in some genres of genres is the wrong word, in like media. It's like people always have this like unkind eye that they have and these unrealistic expectations for beauty. And I turned to poetry because there are so many female writers who are reflecting on that process with honesty and kindness. And it's almost just like a whole secret world. Like, I first found the work of Dorian Lux, where she kind of looks back on these different stages of her life and where she is right now. And it's just so empowering, getting that, like having it's like a hand that's being extended to you. Like, don't drink the poison. Take my hand, love. Let me like show you how it can be. And those were the things that came to my mind.
Oh, that's so great. I love that. And it made me immediately think of, there are so many women writers who have come along and asserted that, a mixture of anger at the patriarchy and frustration at systemic oppression, and also, like you're saying, love and a kind of hope and optimism, just like asserting a different way of looking and being looked at. And, from Audre Lorde to, and Diane DePrima, who's a San Francisco legend, and Alice Notley and Bernadette Mayer. And there's also contemporary writers like Diane Seuss, who's amazing, who just put out a book with Grey Wolf of sonnets. It's incredible. Dana Levin. There's just so many writers who are just writing in the space. And as soon as you said that, I thought, of course, one of the great things about a poem is it can contain this kind of mixture of different feelings and shift really fast, which is authentic to experience, right? Of course, it gives up, Hannah, the pleasure of like lingering and creating characters and scenes, which is more amenable in prose. But thank you for sharing that, all of you. I don't know, do you have any further thoughts about that question before I ask you a bit about the anthology, or does anybody want to add anything? So I just wanted to ask a bit about the book itself. Risk Press is a Northern California publishing house, and they do beautiful individual volumes. In fact, we have a Risk Press author here with us right now, Tamsin. I don't know if you want to say hi, quick hi, Tamsin. Tamsin's a poet and a novelist, and we're fortunate to have the support of Risk Press to fund some editorial positions at St. Mary's this year, and to create this anthology. And so very grateful for that support from Risk Press. And I guess wanted to just ask the editors to just talk a bit about what they're doing and what they hope to accomplish, and what sort of work they're looking for, and what they hope to learn, or anything you want to talk about the book so far. I'm sort of the nominal like boss of this thing, but of course I've completely like abdicated all responsibility in the face of such talented students. I have no need to so really it's your project, and I'm curious how you're thinking about it, and would love to hear about it.
I can go first. This is actually my first time, I guess, in an editing position like this, of receiving submissions and reading through them and doing the editing process. Definitely my first time putting together an anthology, which is really exciting. So it's been fun to learn that process as we go. Definitely excited to work more with the press as we, kind of get the submissions in and solidify those and see what the actual publishing process looks like. I'm definitely looking forward to that. But so far it's been really great. We have a team of 8 total. We have 4 senior editors and 4 assistant editors. And we have 2 to 3 editors working on each genre. So that's been really great so far. And right now we're in the midst of collecting submissions right now. So we had a lot to organize before we did our call for submissions. So that's been going really well. And we also have gotten the opportunity to reach out to some writers that we admire and have been inviting them to submit. And that's been going pretty well too. So that was a really cool process to do, just because, you know, we kind of got to name some authors that we've been reading and we really admire. And I personally was pretty nervous to reach out even over email to some of those writers, but that was pretty fun to do. So yeah, definitely looking forward to the work that we receive and just getting to read everyone's work. And our prompt was pretty open. We wanted it to be a pretty vague description of processing crisis. We wanted people to examine crisis in whatever way they felt like, on whatever scale they felt like. There's definitely a lot of, you know, huge crises, especially right now. But we also wanted to look at things just in everyday life in really small ways and really small moments. So I'm definitely excited to see how it's interpreted.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm just curious about if there's anything in particular you're looking for in your genre, creative nonfiction. Are you hoping to see like any particular type of work? I mean, are you interested in more personal work or things that engage with bigger issues, or both? Or because I mean, your own piece that you read was both personal and, of course, connected deeply with a huge one, maybe probably the hugest crisis we're facing, or certainly among them, the ecological crisis, you know, threat to our species. And so I'm wondering if what you're looking for in terms of submissions.
Yeah, I think personally, I'm definitely partial to like personal pieces. It's what I like to write. It's what I like to read. I think similar to my work, it's interesting to look at the ways that we internalize these bigger crises. Because I think like in my own piece and my own experience, you know, something like the environmental crisis, we don't normally think of as our own personal crisis very often, unless we are immediately affected by them. And so I think it's important to look at the different ways that everyone is affected by it, whether physically, emotionally, you know, however you're affected by it. And I think it's important to look at those different ways that we internalize these things. So I think pieces that touch on that would be really interesting to read.
Yeah, that's great, because, you know, of course, that's also what leads us to activism, right? Is a sense of personal connection to things, and so I mean, the hope might be that people activating their own connection to such larger forces, you know, seeing how that's reflected in the personal, or could help spur action of various kinds. And yeah. I just, there's before Layla, before I get to you, there's a question in the chat, which is, does the project put together an anthology each year? So at St. Mary's each year we have, we publish a literary magazine called Mary Magazine, or I mean, we've considered petitioning to rename it Jesus's Mom Magazine, but I think that maybe the people who run St. Mary's might not be as amused by that as we are. But yeah, so it's a very cool literary magazine that mostly recently has existed online, although there have been print versions of it. But this year we decided to devote to this particular topic, and sort of have it work together with this Risk Press anthology. So every year there is a publication, but this year is a different opportunity because of this great, amazing support we're getting from Risk Press. Who knows? Hopefully something like that will continue in the future, because it's been a great thing to do. So, but yeah, but Layla, I'd love to hear.
You kind of cut out towards the end, Matthew.
Oh, I just said I'd love to hear what you have to say, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Hannah said, I think it's been a really cool experience to be on the other end of, the submissions and kind of just going through and seeing what would work best with the theme. Initially, I remember when you presented the opportunity, and you kind of brought up like, processing crisis, and told us, do with that whatever, speaks to you the most, kind of like giving us full creative opportunity and telling us to like kind of run with it. And the most obvious crisis at that time was kind of the pandemic that was going on. So we were just kind of like, yeah, duh, the pandemic, very big crisis, global crisis. But I think the great thing about that was, as time went on and as we developed like a team and kind of came together creatively, the idea of what artists would respond to as crisis, just beyond the pandemic that we were living through, was just so great to see, and what that looked like, like specifically the processing part. Crisis is so has so many layers to it, depending on what lens you look at it. But seeing the processing part, for me, I think was just like the coolest part of it. Artists specifically have their own rituals, their own ways of doing things. We are very much creatures of habit. But seeing like what processing meant to so many people now with their submissions, and like having that come up in their work with like how they've learned to define things, how they've adapted, and just what it does to them overall as a whole, just because it is a type of trauma and it is something to heal from. And seeing how they move on from that has just been really like amazing to see from like a different perspective. So very much a teacher type moment, teacher student type moment.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. As you were saying that, you said, the biggest crisis we face, and I didn't know what you were going to say, because any number of things could come next after that. But the pandemic, of course, makes sense. But it's in a way like just this crisis that we're in is there's so many different things that all interact with it. I mean, I was just reading right before we started this about an article about the San Francisco School Board, and how the San Francisco public schools, a third of the students in San Francisco are in private schools, and these are, majority of these students are white students, and they've been in school through the whole pandemic, and they're continuing to make good academic progress. And meanwhile, San Francisco public schools are full of students of color, low and a lot of lower income students, and they have been decimated in their education by this pandemic. And the San Francisco School Board is having a lot of trouble getting school started again, and I'm stay out of the reasons for that. But the point is like, so the pandemic is inextricable from a racial crisis. It's the same crisis in a certain kind of way. And then there's economic issues having to do with that. And so it's like, it's all together in a way. It's this terrible time of, and art, is a way of pushing back or pointing to those things or indicating those things in different sorts of ways. And I know you all know this, but it just came to mind because of what you said, and this what I had been reading before. But I love the way you're thinking about it as a hopeful thing too. That's really moving also. Julia, did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Nothing that hasn't already been said.
No, or want to point emphasis anything that's been said, or? You don't have to.
No, sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. Yeah. So I guess the last question I have really, and if there's questions from anybody in the, who's here, please feel free to jump in. But I kind of wanted to ask what your hopes were for the book itself when it comes out. Like, do you have any, like, what would you like readers to get out of it?
I can go ahead and answer. I mean, ideally, I'd like them to be, I guess, seen and validated in all like definitions of their crisis. Because like you said, you had a different definition of crisis than what I did. And that's by the time we actually met with like Marion and I actually met with like the rest of the team, with Hannah and Natalie, and then even further. So our definition of the biggest crisis at that time had changed like 5 times, like initially it was the pandemic, but then after that we were like, oh my God, did you hear about X, Y, or Z, depending what was in the news. So I feel like it would be great to see everybody just be like, yeah, that's a crisis, and go to the next page and be like, that's a crisis as well, and have it be like, the bees are dying, to I spilled my cup, to there's racial segregation in these modern day neighborhoods. So
Yeah, or I'm sick, or a family member's sick, or and that's a kind of crisis, or I'm having an emotional, or just even for no reason I'm having a crisis. I mean, there's so many people who are suffering emotionally, mentally, psychologically from just this time, and then maybe there's not even a specific reason you could point to, and all those things. Yeah, I think people really will be helped by being in solidarity, Hannah, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or?
I really like that answer a lot. I think that's definitely a hope there. I think, I hope that I can be just like a little piece of a time capsule from this moment, and maybe, in a more creative way of, it not only addresses the biggest crises, but it does have these small pieces of the everyday life of 2020 and 2021. And I think that'll be really cool to have printed and to have people read and, be able to keep for hopefully a long time. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So are you still accepting submissions?
Yes, we are accepting submissions through April 9th, I believe.
And how does one submit, Hannah?
We can drop the link actually into the chat. Yeah, it's a Google form that we have, so we will send the link.
Great.
This is excellent, Matthew. Yeah, I'll jump in. Just it's kind of as we wrap things up here. It's been really interesting, informative, inspiring to listen. Just to really listen in. It feels like we're listening in on kind of a writer's workshop, and having people share and having you comment, and just you kind of untangle, what the issues and the complexities and the self-expression that's going on here. So it's been wonderful to be a part of, and appreciate everybody's time. I maybe it's going to leave everybody with a chance to say whatever you like, but also with one question. At America Scores, we work with younger students, generally elementary school students, just really oftentimes learning to read, to write, to express themselves. And I think it was Layla, it was in your account where, or no, I've kind of forgotten, but where silence was one response to crisis, and then saying somebody else's words was the male response to the crisis. And and obviously when somebody's writing and sharing, that's voice, that's agency. And how, like, where does that, if you were to give advice to younger students or people working with younger students, how do you get to that where you get to expressing your own voice, your own processing, your own specificity around these crisis or trauma? So it's a general question, but also just for yourselves, like how early were you able, as students growing up, be able to sort of access that, literature as a way to move?
Yeah, thanks for that, Colin. And I'll maybe let the panelists answer that. Julia, you look like you want to jump in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I taught 5th grade English for 4 years in Baltimore. And I think like making space for them to, well, I guess creating a classroom culture where it's safe to express yourself and your feelings, I think is of course like the first step. And then giving them the opportunity to write through those feelings is another really great step. I think, I mean, you probably have more experience than me, but one of my favorite strategies was, if a student was experiencing something, is they could either talk through it with me or they could write about it, and making space and time for them to do that. And then it would be really easy for that to translate to, if you have free writing time, or even a more sculpted prompt, being able to channel some of that emotion into that, if that's something they're interested in doing. Makes for really powerful student work. It's really exciting.
All right. Well, we're always looking for poetry coaches, Julia. So just so you know, when you're ready to get back in the saddle there. But and by way of segue to Hannah and Layla, I mean, how important is sharing? Like, I get the process of writing and creating safe space and maybe one-on-one, but more communal sharing, whether it's publishing or things like this. How important is that in this poetic process?
So I grew up doing slam poetry first, way before I ever thought of doing an MFA. Slam poetry was my definition of poetry, and slam was very community based. I was on a youth slam team for Brave New Voices for 3 years, and it was the thing that kept me busy. It kept me out of trouble, basically. And the reason why I was able to even pursue that comfortably was because when I went to the space, there were other kids there that looked like me and came from backgrounds similar to mine, and all like wanted to do poetry. And I think that was the thing that made it feel safer, was the community vibe that was very much emphasized. We all went to competition. It was understood that we were prepping for competition, but Brave New Voices and just our team space in general made it a point to come up with the phrase, the point is not the points, it's the poetry. So essentially, when we're doing this so that we can create a communal space where we can all come together and share work, not necessarily beat each other in a competition. And I think that community space just made me feel so validated and safe in a time where I think it's really integral to just as a youth, I very easily could have gone another way if I didn't have that space. And I think the sharing aspect that was emphasized so much through community was what saved me from becoming someone who just scribbles in my notebook. It made all the difference.
No, that's eloquent. Thank you for that. And Hannah, but before we turn to you, I'll just plug that in the Poetry Summit and the sessions that are coming up, we do have some spoken word sessions. We've got Youth Speaks and Brave New Voices. They're going to be doing a session talking about that. We have a session on poetry as a team sport, which I think sort of just talks to what you just said about that community and the relationship to safe space and just peer feedback, right, on getting better with your peers. So that's great. Hannah, any parting words or advice for young poets, for students who might be reluctant to write, let alone share what they're thinking and feeling?
So I didn't my first experience of sharing my work was actually in undergrad of college, when I started doing workshops for classes. So I didn't share my work for a long time. It just kind of lived in my journal forever. And so definitely the workshop experience can be really nerve-wracking. And it's sometimes, pretty scary. But I think if you have a really great community that you're able to workshop with, it is really validating. And it can be very constructive where you're getting really great feedback. But I think also if you have a trusting and loving community, you are you're sharing experiences and you get to know these people on like really incredible levels, and you just like reach this understanding with each other, and that's been really special. That's been a really special opportunity in the MFA program as well. I'm really close with the nonfiction cohort, and that's been a really, really great experience. So it's definitely scary at first, but I would say it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, only this amazing to hear. I mean, I've done a fair amount of little workshops or classes with younger kids, and I find that presenting it more as like play is good, and something one way of doing that is through very low stakes collaborative activities, making a poem all together, or making a poem with a small group, just to play and have fun and like lower the pressure of like, oh, this is my like individual voice. Because I mean, that part of it is important and that part will come out, but also I think that one of the things that gets taken away from us as we get older is this sense of play and enjoyment of just like making something that's creative and fun,
Mhm.
and that expresses our sense of individuality, and that we should, as teachers and adults, I think we can do a lot of good work by reminding the students that or kids that, that part of them is something that they don't ever have to let go of. They can carry that through their whole lives. And, that's, if I could accomplish that, if I could see them have fun making stuff while I'm doing these workshops, then I'm like, that's a win for me. Because I know they'll carry that forward and express themselves in all kinds of other ways, like if they're reminded that they are thinking, creative beings, whose value, who have a worth just because of who they are. Simply that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, I think we can wrap it up. We've kind of come full circle from our happiness poem at the beginning to that message of joy and fun, right? Even in crisis, I guess that's a real takeaway for me. Like, and that's really the tough part of this, because we are living, dealing with very heavy, significant issues, and we're using poetry to go through that. But to bring the playfulness and the fun and the happiness, right, and the love through that, I guess, is really the gift.
Well, thank you all so much, and I just want to say, yeah, thanks to you all and for your organization, and all the great work that you do, and for setting this whole thing up, and thanks Tamsin for connecting us tonight. But I want to say, Hannah, Layla, and Julia, thank you so much for sharing your work and your thoughts, and you're the future of literature. So we're just glad to get a chance to hear your work and to be part of that, that journey. So thank you so much, the three of you, for taking the time to be here, and thanks to all of you for hosting us.
All right, thank you. We'll see you later in the summit, we hope, or at our next writing workshop.